In 1787, Thomas Jefferson laid out a simple rule for the survival of the American Republic. For democracy to work and for liberty to be protected, citizens needed complete, unvarnished information about what their government was actually doing. To guarantee this, the founders wrote the First Amendment. The text says, "Congress shall make no law, abridging the freedom of the press." In theory, this means publishers are free from prior restraint. The government cannot legally step in and censor a story before it goes to print. Yet the modern media landscape is tangled up in federal oversight, heavy fines, and corporate regulations. The catch is that no law does not actually mean the government lacks control. Instead, lawmakers and agencies use invisible leashes, rules that don't technically censor the press, but tightly dictate how it operates behind the scenes. To truly understand the news, you have to look at the three workarounds the state uses: to manage information through access limitations, through strict infrastructure regulation, and national security exceptions. When it comes to print media, newspapers and magazines, the government almost never stops a publisher from printing a story. But freedom of the press does not mean freedom from severe financial consequences after the ink dries. If a publication prints false statements intended to damage someone's reputation, they can be sued for libel. Public officials can hit media companies with massive defamation lawsuits if they can prove the publisher acted with malicious intent or a total disregard for the truth. Then there is the access loophole. The government cannot legally stop a reporter from writing a story, but officials are under no obligation to hand over the information needed to write it in the first place. Journalists fight this gatekeeping by using the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. This law allows them to legally pry non-confidential records out of federal agencies that would otherwise keep their files closed. Even then, reporters lack special legal status. In the 1972 case Brandsburg v. Hayes, the Supreme Court ruled that the First Amendment does not grant the press any special access to restricted sites, beyond what the general public gets, nor does it give them a constitutional right to shield their informants from the courts. Print freedom relies entirely on a reporter's individual ability to dig up hidden information and protect their sources without the luxury of special constitutional rights. This map visualizes how television and radio operate under entirely different rules. Radiating broadcast signals quickly crowd the airspace, and because the spectrum is a limited physical resource, the courts decided it belongs to the public. Because the spectrum is finite, the government steps in to manage it. The Federal Communications Commission holds the absolute power to grant, deny, or revoke the licenses that stations need to legally broadcast. Historically, the FCC used this power to influence actual broadcast content. Under a rule called the Fairness Doctrine, stations were legally required to present contrasting viewpoints whenever they covered controversial community issues. That requirement ended in 1987. Congress tried to keep the doctrine in place, but President Ronald Reagan vetoed the bill, arguing that the rise of cable television offered enough alternative ideas to make the rule unnecessary. Without the mandate to provide balanced arguments, the media landscape shifted fast. The repeal triggered an explosion of highly partisan, one-sided political talk radio shows that could now lean entirely into extreme viewpoints. Beyond content, the FCC controls who gets to own the megaphones. For decades, there were strict limits to prevent local monopolies. But the Telecommunications Act of 1996 changed those rules, explicitly tax ownership restrictions, and theoretically increase market competition. As this flowchart illustrates, the relaxed rules triggered an era of massive corporate consolidation. Huge companies began swallowing up thousands of local radio and television stations. Before the 1996 Act, a company was legally capped at 40 stations nationwide. Today, one entity owns 850. The broadcast media you tune into daily is a highly engineered landscape, directly shaped by FCC mandates and unprecedented corporate monopolies. The absolute highest stakes boundary of press freedom happens when the press's duty to inform the public collides with the military's absolute need for operational secrecy. During the Vietnam War, newspapers acquired a classified Defense Department study known as the Pentagon Papers. The government tried to block the story, but the Supreme Court ruled the press had the right to publish the secret documents, stating it did not harm national security. The military adapted its strategy. Instead of letting reporters wander freely, by the 2003 Iraq War, the Pentagon began embedding journalists directly with combat troops. This legally granted press access while strictly controlling what reporters saw and banning them from broadcasting exact locations. But the digital era bypassed those physical controls entirely. Sites like WikiLeaks began publishing thousands of leaked state documents directly to the public, sidestepping traditional government gatekeepers and mainstream editorial boards. This culminated in 2013, when Edward Snowden leaked documents proving the National Security Agency actively monitored the phone calls and internet traffic of U.S. citizens. Because the First Amendment makes it incredibly difficult for the government to prosecute a media outlet for publishing these leaks, prosecutors pivot. They aggressively target the human sources of the leaks with espionage charges. When national security is on the line, the most effective method of controlling the narrative is to punish the whistleblower, ensuring the information stops before it ever reaches a journalist's desk. Congress shall make no law is a powerful ideal, but it is not an impenetrable shield. It functions as the starting line for a constant legal negotiation between public access and state control. The reality we see on our screens and read in our papers is heavily engineered by the threat of libel lawsuits, FCC licensing rules, massive corporate mergers, and the aggressive prosecution of those who leak state secrets. A free press remains the ultimate tool for keeping the government transparent. But to be a truly informed citizen, you need to understand the complex rules, regulations, and corporate structures that dictate exactly what information is actually allowed to reach you.